Millions of people have asthma, but what's really going on deep inside our lungs is way more complex than you might think. It's not just about inflammation. It's also about a tiny biological switch that seems to be stuck in the on position. Okay, let's dive into this and really explore the science of what makes an airway overactive.
So we all recognize the signs of an asthma attack, right? The wheezing, that tightness in your chest, the shortness of breath. But what's actually, mechanically going wrong inside your lungs to cause all that? Let's dig in a little deeper.
Okay, so there's a fancy scientific term for this. It's called bronchial hyperresponsiveness, or BHR for short. Now, think of it this way. For someone with asthma, their airways might react just a little bit to something like cold air. But with BHR, that reaction is dialed all the way up to 11. The airways narrow way too much, way too easily. This right here is the absolute hallmark of asthma. You see, for the longest time, the main focus was pretty much all on inflammation. And look, that's a huge piece of the puzzle, for sure, but it's not the whole story. The thing that causes that immediate airway narrowing is the smooth muscle that's wrapped around your bronchial tubes. In BHR, this muscle is just completely overreacting, squeezing with way too much force. So, okay, if this muscle overreaction is the main problem, how in the world do you even test for it? Well, that question leads us to a really fascinating story about diagnostics, one with a hidden twist that nobody noticed for decades. The standard test, the go-to, is called the methacholine challenge test, or MCT. Basically, you inhale a substance that makes your airways contract, and doctors measure how you respond. But here's the crazy part. From 1999 all the way up to 2018, the standard way this test was done had a major flaw. A flaw that could actually make asthma completely invisible to the test itself. And what's wild is that the huge difference between the old way and the new way comes down to something incredibly simple: how the patient breathes. The old guideline had people take 5 deep breaths. The new, corrected one? Just breathe normally. So what gives? Why does a change that seems so small matter so much? Well, it's because taking a deep breath isn't just a neutral act. For your airways, it's kind of like hitting a reset button. A deep inhalation actually stretches out that airway smooth muscle, and that can temporarily reverse the narrowing and make the muscle less sensitive to the trigger. They call it a bronchoprotective effect, and it was basically hiding the very thing the test was trying to find. And we're not talking about a small error here. For patients with mild asthma, who are often the people who really need this test for a solid diagnosis, the old deep breath method gave a false negative almost half the time, nearly 50%. Can you imagine being told you're fine when the test itself was just covering up the evidence? Okay, so we've established the big picture problem. The airway muscles are squeezing way too hard. But to really understand what's going on with asthma, we need to zoom in. I mean, way in. We need to go past the lungs, past the airways, and put the star of our show right under the microscope: the airway smooth muscle. Right. It's one thing to say the muscles are hyper-responsive, but that just leads to the next question, doesn't it? What's the molecular command? What signal is getting crossed inside those muscle cells that's telling them to just go into complete overdrive? And to answer that, we have to zoom in again. We're going past the tissue level and right inside an individual muscle cell, down to the molecular engine that's running the whole show. This is where we're going to find the real switch. Okay, I know, this looks like the circuit board for a spaceship or something, but bear with me. What you're looking at is the super complex signaling pathway that tells a muscle cell when to contract. We're not going to dissect this whole thing. We're just going to focus on 2 really key parts: the normal on signal and a second system that just goes haywire in asthma. So first, let's look at the standard process, how it's supposed to work. It all starts with a signal. That signal causes calcium ions to flood into the cell. Think of this calcium like a key. It turns on an enzyme called MLCK. Then MLCK activates the muscle fibers and boom, you get a contraction. Simple, clean, effective. But, and this is the absolute key, in hyper-responsive airways, a second system kicks into high gear. This is a phenomenon known as calcium sensitization. And what that means is the muscle becomes way more sensitive to the calcium that's already there. It's not about getting more calcium, it's about the muscle overreacting to a totally normal amount. So if we look back at our big, complicated map, This extra amplification is controlled by one specific pathway you see highlighted, the Rho-A/Rho kinase pathway. The easiest way to think about this is as a molecular accelerator pedal. In BHR, that pedal gets stuck to the floor, cranking up the contraction signal way beyond what's needed. And researchers really hit the nail on the head here. As a couple of them, Chiba and Ms. Sao put it, the trigger, the agonist, it doesn't just cause a contraction, it increases myofilament Ca2+ sensitivity. In other words, it makes the muscle machinery super twitchy and ready to overreact at a moment's notice. So how does this stuck accelerator actually work? Well, it's pretty sneaky. The Rho kinase enzyme, which is the final step in the pathway, does something really clever and, well, destructive. It targets the muscle's off switch, an enzyme that's supposed to relax the muscle. By blocking that off switch, Rho kinase traps the muscle, keeping it contracted for longer and with more force.
And the proof for this? It's really compelling. In animal studies, scientists compared healthy airways to hyperresponsive ones. And just look at this. On the left, you can literally see how much stronger the muscle tension is in the hyperresponsive airways. And on the right, you see the smoking gun. The amount of that Rho-A protein, the thing that kicks off the accelerator pathway, is massively increased. More protein, more signal, more squeeze. It's that direct.
Okay, let's zoom back out. We've gone from the whole person all the way down to a single molecular pathway. So what's the point? Why does this matter? Well, because if you can identify the exact broken part of the engine, you can start to figure out how to fix it. And that's exactly where the science gets so exciting. This whole deep molecular dive has put a giant spotlight on the Rho-A/Rho kinase pathway. It's gone from just being one little part of a complex diagram to being a prime target for a whole new class of asthma drugs. So let's just do a quick recap of what we figured out. We know asthma's big hallmark, BHR, is basically a muscle problem. We know that for years, our main test was accidentally hiding the condition. And deep down at the molecular level, we know this overreaction is being driven by that Rho-A/Rho kinase pathway, acting like a stuck accelerator because it disables the muscle's off switch. And this isn't just theory. The story keeps going. Scientists have already developed drugs designed specifically to block this pathway. They're called Rho kinase inhibitors. And in lab studies, a compound called Y27632 has been shown to do exactly what you'd hope. It relaxes these overactive airway muscles and shuts down that hyperresponsiveness. So this all brings us to one final, pretty amazing thought. We've journeyed from a common symptom all the way down to one specific molecule. And it makes you wonder, by understanding all this intricate biology, could the future of treating conditions like asthma, the future of breathing freely, really just come down to designing a key to flip off a single overactive molecular switch?